Wir sind sehr glücklich und wirklich sehr, sehr happy, dass du uns zur Verfügung stehst, lieber Gideon. Du wärst gerne dabei gewesen, das weiß ich. Das hast du uns mitgeteilt. Deine Grüße an die Teilnehmenden und an den Bischof werde ich weiterleiten. Wir wollen etwas von deinem Wissen über die Situation in Israel, aber auch insbesondere in Palästina, unter diesen schwierigen Umständen. Und vor allem eine Analyse dessen, weil du ja tagtäglich damit zu tun hast, über die Zukunft des palästinensischen Problems. Ich vermeide das Wort Konflikt. Es ist kein Konflikt mehr. Es ist ein Problem. Ja. Und wie es dann weitergehen wird mit der dauerhaften Besatzung und ob die israelische Öffentlichkeit mit einer dauerhaften Besatzung leben kann, das beschäftigt uns auch mit, denn die Unzufriedenheit in der israelischen Bevölkerung überlagert das Palästina-Problem mittlerweile, das wissen wir, und deshalb gibt es keine Lösung dafür. Aber unser Ansatz ist ja der, ohne Lösung des Palästina-Problems wird es wahrscheinlich weder in Israel noch in Palästina einen dauerhaften Frieden geben. Und da wir für den Frieden, wir deine Analyse und deine Betrachtung hören. Ich bitte dich drum. Dankeschön.
Danke, Nasi. Es tut mir so leid, dass ich kann es Deutsch sprechen. Ich habe es ganz verlernt. Und vielleicht nächstes Jahr wird mein Deutsch zurück sein. But now I'll switch into English. I need a few months to re-establish my German because I don't have enough opportunities to speak it. But as Nazi just said, I'll be happy to take questions in German. I enjoy understanding German. But my German is a German of little children and not of adult people, for sure not of political people. I think I told you last time when I saw you that when I was a child, I didn't know how to say occupation in German because nobody spoke about occupation when I was a child. In any case, I'm very happy to be again with you. The memory of my visit to your convention is an unforgettable memory, both the location. I guess there are some of the people who heard me also last time.
Yes.
And they all got younger. I got older, but I'm sure they all got younger. How many years? When was it? How many years is it?
3 years.
3 years, okay. 3 years. 3 years we didn't change much. But things changed in the Middle East in those 3 years, and not for the good, I must say. Or may I say, partly for the good and partly for the bad. I think the main change in the last years is the beginning of the recognition that the occupation is not temporary anymore. Nobody serious can speak anymore about the occupation as a temporary phenomena when we are celebrating now 57, 58 years for the occupation. I'm speaking about the 1967 occupation. And this is not just a matter of chronological question, it is a matter of substance, because if the occupation is not temporary, and I claim it's not temporary, nobody can claim that it's temporary because nobody sees the end of it around the corner, and 56 years, 57 years are in any case a time of 2 generations already who live under the occupation, when there are no signs of ending it, and it is so many years in which it lasts, you cannot call it occupation anymore. You, Nazi, said before, you can't call it a conflict, you can't call the occupation anymore. Yeah. The occupied territories became part and parcel of Israel and part and parcel of the Israeli regime. In other words, Israel cannot be perceived anymore as a democracy. You cannot be a democracy with a tyranny in your backyard. And therefore, the change must be in the overall look at Israel, not at the occupation. We have to look at Israel as a whole, as a new entity. It cannot continue to be the darling of the West. It cannot be perceived as the only democracy in the Middle East, as Israelis like to present themselves, because Israel stopped being a democracy. Israel is by now an apartheid state, and I think that nobody honest or serious can deny it. It's not question of cursing Israel. It's not question of saying bad things or trying to provoke. When there are two peoples living under the Israeli regime, when there are 5.5 Jews and 5.5 Palestinians between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, half and half, 50-50, when one people gains all the rights, all the possible rights, and the other people doesn't gain any rights, what else can you call it if not apartheid? So as long as it was temporary, you could call it, like it is recognized in the international law, a military occupation. Sudetenland, Deutschland was occupied by Germany in 1939 as a temporary phenomenon. Today, Sudetenland, Deutschland is part of Czech Republic. No Germans anymore, only Czechs, but it was a military occupation with a beginning and an end. The Israeli occupation does not mark any end. Therefore, it's not temporary. Therefore, it is part of the regime of Israel. Therefore, Israel is an apartheid state. Once we realize this, there must be consequences, because the world still treats Israel as a democracy. The world still sees Israel as part of the Western, developed, liberal world. But that's a masquerade. This is not the reality. Israel is now, as all of you know, is struggling over its democracy with ongoing protest, which is very impressive. Today, Saturday, like every Saturday, hundreds of thousands of Israelis will go to the street. Now for over 2 months, every Saturday evening, hundreds of thousands, which is really remarkable. But they will go and protest against cracks in the democracy for the Jews. Only this. They will not speak about democracy. They will speak about democracy for the Jewish citizens of Israel. There is no democracy like this, which is aimed only at one people and the other people is left beside. More than this, those protesters who are good Israelis, very aware politically, real liberals, at least in their own eyes, but they don't let anyone talk about the occupation in their demonstrations. They really believe that there can be a democracy with occupation. Now, there is nothing like this. There is no democracy with occupation, for sure not democracy with apartheid. This doesn't go together. In South Africa, there was a democracy. There were elections. There were parties. But it was all only for the whites. Anyone in the world called South Africa a democracy? It was a joke. Nobody treated South Africa as a democracy. When over 90% of the inhabitants of South Africa couldn't take part in this game called democracy. So in Israel, half of the people who live under the Israeli regime, including Gaza, which is also under Israeli regime, even though in a different control than the West Bank. But still, Israel is deciding the reality in Gaza, and for sure Israel is deciding the reality in the West Bank. This cannot be called a democracy. Look, some of you visited Israel. You traveled to the West Bank. Like maybe you travel to the Betustans in South Africa. You see one village next to the other, two villages, one next to the other. The older one, which was established hundreds of years ago, its inhabitants have no rights whatsoever. They don't even have citizenship of any country. Maybe the only people in the world without citizenship. I don't know any other people in the world who don't have citizenship at all. With all the respect to Palestinian passports, it's a passport of a non-existing state. It's a game. It's not a real passport, and for sure it's not a real citizenship. So in one village, it will be people without rights, any rights. In the other village, next by, there will be people with all the rights. And when I say all the rights, all the liberal rights that we can imagine ourselves. Really living in a liberal, democratic reality. Once in a few years, there will be elections. The people of one village can participate in those elections. Their neighbors, 500 meters away from their homes, cannot participate in those elections. I really want to ask you, how can you call this regime when one village have all the rights and the other one has no rights whatsoever? The problem is that Israel and Israelis, almost all of them, are not ready to look at the mirror, are still believing that we are living in a democracy, are still believing that the demonstrations now and the protest will guard our democracy. But what democracy is it? It's a total corrupted democracy because it is a national democracy for one nation and a binational state. Now, for many years, we all had the hope of the two-state solution. It's the most logical solution one can imagine himself. There are two peoples struggling over one piece of land. Let's divide the land for the two peoples and have two states. What is more just and what is more logic than this? And the two-state solution is with us now for a few decades as the ultimate solution. Stay somewhere on the shelf, and one day we will just take it down from the shelf and implement it. We just wait for the Palestinian partner, for the Israeli partner, for the right time, but there is a solution, the two-state solution. The only problem is that this solution died long time ago and is not achievable anymore. We can all struggle for two states and believe in two states, but this is a train that left the station long time ago. And trains never come back. There will be another train coming in, but this train left the station with almost 700,000 settlers, including in East Jerusalem, Jewish settlers. There's no chance to evacuate them, and without their evacuation, there is no viable Palestinian state. It can be just a puppet, but not a real state. I'm ready to say here more than this. The maximum that the most liberal Israelis are ready for is a demilitarized Palestinian state. Excuse me, why should it be demilitarized? Why does Israel have the right, like any state in the world, to protect itself? And Palestine will not have the right to protect itself? What kind of future is it that a state is not allowed to have an army like any state in the world? So by definition, it was a very problematic solution. But now, in any case, it's not realistic anymore to believe in it, because the settlers won. We have to realize it. Those of you who come to visit Palestine and go to the West Bank can see in their own eyes. You cannot travel in the West Bank more than 5 or 10 minutes in a car without seeing a settlement. The settlers are the most powerful political group in Israel, the settlers and their supporters. They are now under this government at their peak because their representatives hold all the major positions in the government. But also in former governments which were defined as liberals, as left or central left, they were very powerful. I must remind you, those of you who come from a social democrat background, and I guess that at least some of you come from a social democrat background, that the Social Democrats of Israel, the Labour Party, is the founding father and mother of the occupation and of the settlement project. It's not Likud, it's not Netanyahu, it is Labour who started this whole project. It is true that the Likud took it to new peaks, but who put the first steps? Who did the first step? Who enabled it? Who let Jews go to live there? Who decided that Israel belongs only to the Jews? It was Labour, no one else but Labour. So in Israel, there is one consensus, almost from wall to wall. Likud and Labour, left and right, are fighting almost on every issue. There is one issue on which they really agree, and this is continuing the occupation. Neither Likud, no Labour, no the left, the Zionist left, have any plan to put an end to the occupation. It is true that the Likud is more honest and says the occupation will last forever, and the Zionist left is more hypocritical, claiming that one day there will be a solution. But they know in their heart that, first of all, they never did anything to promote this solution. And they know also that this solution is lost, is gone. Many times I say that the two-state solution is dead, but I have my doubts if it was ever really born. Because I never saw one Israeli government or one Israeli prime minister who seriously meant to go for the two-state solution, who seriously meant to put an end to the occupation. There was none, but really none. There were those who thought that some kind of interim agreements will guarantee Israel to continue with the occupation forever, with an easing a little bit the occupation, with giving some rights to the Palestinians, but none of them meant a viable state equal in its rights to the Jewish state, none of them. And therefore, we are facing a very problematic situation in which the Israeli society, almost as a whole, is not ready for any solution right now. Nothing. It's even not on the agenda. You will be shocked how much more all of you know about the occupation than an average Israeli. They know nothing. And they don't want to know anything. And the Israeli media enable them not to know anything. I'll give you an example from last week. Last Thursday, not this Thursday, but Thursday before a week, in the evening, in the village of Nebi Salah, a father took his baby to his car. They were both on their way to a birthday party of the aunt of the baby in a neighbor village. Haytham Tamimi put his child, Muhammad, 2.5 years old, in the back seat of his car, a Skoda, and then went around the car on his way to enter the car and to go to the birthday. The mother was still at home. She planned to come out in a few seconds. All of a sudden, an Israeli sniper started to shoot the car. 5 bullets in the car. One hit the head of the baby Muhammad. One hit the shoulder of his father. And the baby Muhammad was taken by an Israeli helicopter to a hospital, but after 4 days, last Monday, Muhammad died after his brain was totally damaged from the bullet. You know that I checked it on the day that Muhammad died, Monday. Half of the big mainstream media in Israel didn't even mention it. Didn't even mention it. Can you believe it? An Israeli soldier, and about those facts there are no argument. The army say that it was an Israeli soldier who shot the car. An Israeli soldier is shooting and killing a baby, a toddler of 2.5 years. And this is not important enough or interesting enough to mention it in the major news programs of Israel. Can you believe this? Now, this is not by chance, obviously. The viewers don't want to hear about it. The readers don't want to read about it. And the media, which is totally commercial, doesn't want to bother them. Why should we bother them with a terrible story about an Israeli soldier who shot in the head of a baby? They might feel some guilt. So let's prevent it from them. Let's avoid it from them. Now, this is just an example from last week, but this is systematic. The Israeli public opinion is not bothered by the occupation, is not aware to the crimes, which are daily, is not aware to what does it mean to be a Palestinian who lives under occupation, will it be in Gaza or in the West Bank? And therefore, the Israelis can continue their lives without any moral question marks, because they feel everything is fine. More than this, because Israel and Israelis don't pay any price because of the occupation, which is quite rare, because Russians at least pay some price for the occupation of Ukraine, part of Ukraine. The Russians are paying a price. There are sanctions. There's a terrible war. Russians are paying some kind of price. Israelis don't pay almost any price. No sanctions, no, except of some condemnations by the EU and by the State Department, which Israel learned to ignore because they were all hollow. Israel doesn't pay any price. When it was South Africa, the world knew very well what to do. But now the world is paralyzed. And Israel today can do almost whatever it wants without any limits, because nobody pays for the crimes, nobody is punished, nobody pay any kind of price, personal or national, nothing. Israel is in a very good shape. Israelis feel very good about themselves. No sanctions, even mentioning sanctions is illegitimate. And this comes to its peak in the last years, especially in your country, with the new strategy of the Israeli propaganda, namely to label any criticism about Israel as anti-Semitism. This is the biggest success of Israeli propaganda. It is working like hell in your country, but it's working also all over Europe and even in the United States. In the UK, it's working. In France, it's working everywhere. you say something critical about Israel, you are an anti-Semite. And unfortunately, Europe collaborated with this game. It's a very manipulative, cynical game by Israel, and Europe fall to the trap. Instead of standing up and say, you don't dare to blame us in anti-Semitism when we are talking on behalf of international law, behalf of justice, behalf of morality. Instead of this, Israel is, with all the crimes of the occupation, is calling any criticism as anti-Semitism, and instead of Israel apologizing for its deeds, the critics have to apologize, and the critics are paying a price. Look what they are doing now to Roger Waters. Look what in your country he went through. Roger Waters, I can assure you, because we are very good friends, there is not 1 gram of anti-Semitism in Roger Waters, nothing. His father was killed in Italy by the fascists. All his life, he fought against fascism. He has nothing of anti-Semite in him. Believe me, after many, many hours of conversations with him and being together, this great man is not an anti-Semite. But the whole machinery portrays him as an anti-Semite. And now, all his very just criticism about Israel is not heard because he is anti-Semite. And when he comes to perform in Munich or in Frankfurt, it must go through the law, through the legal system in order to enable him to sing. And this is already a question of freedom of speech in your countries. Because the fact that you are not allowed to criticize Israel in Germany and in any other place start to become a German problem, not only a Palestinian-Israeli problem. And that's your challenge, I believe. I think that people like you who are so devoted and so courageous to fight against the occupation, to fight for Palestinian justice, have to fight now against this unbelievable labeling of anything as anti-Semitism. You should really, if I may say so, you should really stand up and say, no, Israel, you are wrong. We are going to continue to criticize you in what we believe should be criticized and stop this manipulation of calling us anti-Semites. There is nothing between criticism of the occupation and anti-Semitism. If you see an Israeli soldier shooting a baby of 2.5 years in his head, and you condemn it, you are not an anti-Semite, you are a man of conscience. And this is what you are, your group. I remember where last time you couldn't find a venue in Berlin. And we were lucky enough to get to this wonderful monastery, which is so beautiful. I mean, I was almost grateful to the authorities in Germany that didn't let us meet in Berlin. And instead of this, we got this wonderful location where you are now. That's not freedom of speech. What does it mean? What did you, finally, you are the bad ones? You who want to fight against immorality and for implementing the international law, you have to hide, you have to shut up, you have to apologize, you have to explain yourself. That's the end. Instead of Israel being in this position, and the occupation being in this position, and the Israeli army being in this position. So to sum up, very little hope from within Israel, almost no hope for change, as long as the world will not get into action. And when I say the world, it's mainly the United States and the EU. And Germany is a very important actor in the EU, obviously. The hope is with you. I must say that in the last years, there are promising signs, first of all in the United States, and above all in the Democratic Party. You hear today some circles in the Democratic Party in the United States are more progressive than in Europe. And that's a good hope. Also, the Jewish community in the United States is changing, and for the good. And at least the young generation, part of it, starts to fed up with Israeli propaganda. They had enough of it. They want the truth. So this is a very promising sign. On the other hand, and you know it better than me, in Europe, there is a fatigue. People are tired of the Palestinian issue. You have new issues to deal with: Ukraine, environment, immigration, all very crucial issues, all very dramatic. I, by all means, don't underestimate those issues, but they pushed the Palestinian problem into a corner, and they start to be forgotten, and people lose interest in them, and above all, people lose solidarity. And I don't blame those who think that when there is such a terrible war inside Europe, how can you care now about the Palestinians when you see what's happening in Ukraine? And you can't fight in all fronts. But we have to remember that the Palestinian problem will not be solved by itself, and will not be solved by the actors, by the present actors. It calls for an international involvement, because without any international involvement, nothing will happen. And the key right now is in your hands, in the hands of civil societies, of devoted groups like your group, not to let the Palestinian be forgotten, not to let this issue be put in the corner. We have to continue to remember that while we are talking here, Palestinians of third and fourth generation are living an unbearable life, if in the jail, in the biggest jail in the world called Gaza, or in the West Bank, and this shouldn't continue forever. Thank you very much for having me, and now I'll be more than happy to take questions of this.
Small translation, and you can follow up and correct me, of course. Gideon Levy spricht von keiner temporären Besatzung. Es handelte sich in der Tat, wie ich sagte, wie er bestätigte, nicht um einen Konflikt, sondern um ein dauerhaftes Problem. Mittlerweile ist die Besatzung Bestandteil der israelischen Politik und des Staates Israel. Darüber hinaus sei die Demokratie mit einer Besatzung auf Dauer überhaupt nicht tragbar. Israel kann nicht das Liebling der Weltöffentlichkeit bleiben und sein und von sich behaupten, die einzige Demokratie im Nahen Osten zu sein, wenn dieser Staat weiterhin ein Apartheidssystem. Israel bekommt keine Kritik von anderen Ländern, von anderen Staaten. Die Hälfte der Bevölkerung auf der israelischen Seite beherrscht mit allen ihnen zur Verfügung stehenden Rechten die andere Hälfte auf der anderen Seite. Sodass also die eine Hälfte, die zweite Hälfte der Bevölkerung, also die Palästinenser, gänzlich unter Kontrolle hält. Israel ist und soll und möchte Teil der liberalen Welt sein. Man spricht aber nicht unbedingt von Beendigung der Besatzung im eigenen Land. Das wird so gut wie vernachlässigt. Aber, sagt er, wer von euch in der Westbank war, kann ohne weiteres erkennen und sehen, dass wir Anzeichen und Belege haben, wie einst in Südafrika. Israel und die politischen Parteien kennen die Realität in der Westbank und im Gazastreifen sehr gut, aber unternehmen nichts dagegen. Wenn die eine Hälfte der Bevölkerung das Recht hat, Wahlen durchzuführen und die andere gar keine, dann ist hier eine Schieflage. Israel verfolgt eben eine von ihm, Zitat, nationale Demokratie. Wenn sich zwei Völker um das gleiche Land bemühen oder kämpfen, dann ist die Lösung ganz einfach, dieses Land unter diese beiden Völker zu teilen, sagt er. 2 Staaten war einst die Lösung und sollte auch bleiben. Man sollte auch dafür kämpfen, dass die Palästinenser ihren eigenen Staat bekommen, auch wenn sie sogar bewaffnet sind, denn jeder Staat hat das Recht, genauso wie Israel, sich militärisch gegen Angriffe anderer Staaten zu verteidigen. 700.000 und mehr Siedlerinnen und Siedler in Ostjerusalem und in der Westbank sind mittlerweile ansässig. Und diese große Anzahl von Siedlerinnen und Siedlern ist eine Bedrohung für die Palästinenser, aber auch für den Staat Israel, weil die Siedler mit ihren sehr starken Vertretern in der Regierung eine sehr starke Macht mittlerweile darstellen. Die anderen Parteien sind so gut wie weg. Die Arbeiterpartei einst war die Partei, die den Staat aufgebaut habe. Und die Parteien, die jetzt regieren, haben mit dem Aufbau des Staates jetzt nichts zu tun. Sie verfolgen ihre eigene Politik der weiteren Trennung und der weiteren Repressalien. Israel hat sich im Laufe der Jahre mit allen ehemaligen Regierungspräsidenten, mit allen Regierungen vorher aufgebaut von einem Krieg auf den anderen und verfolgte genau diesen Schritt, dass genau das passiert, was wir jetzt haben. Es ist nicht ein Zustand, der jetzt neu gekommen ist. Die Politik, so sagt er, will zurzeit keine Lösung und verfolgt auch keine. Die Tötung des Mohammed Tamimi, des Kindes 2,5 Jahre alt, ist nur exemplarisch darzulegen. Er hat darüber berichtet, das Kind ist in dem Wagen des Vaters erschossen. Darüber hat die Presse oder die Medien gar nicht berichtet. Der Soldat, der getötet hat, ist nicht mal belangt worden. Warum? Weil das belanglos ist, weil der Vater ohnehin Terrorist ist. Israel zahlt nicht für die Besatzung. Das ist anders als bei anderen Staaten, wo die Besatzung dann beendet wurden, weil eben der Preis zu teuer war. Israel zahlt nichts dafür und deshalb kann das im Grunde ein Dauerzustand bleiben. Israel leistet sich dieses, weil es keinen inneren Druck gibt von keinem Land. Und Israel macht, was es will. In Deutschland ist es bekannt, dass eben die israelische Propaganda mittlerweile auch obsiegt, weil den Israelis, der israelischen Propaganda gelungen ist, dass eben die Medien und die Politik genau das übernommen haben, was unter Antisemitismus zu verstehen ist. Das heißt, eine jegliche Kritik an den Staat Israel wird sofort umgedeutet als Antisemitismus. Und das ist eben ein Fehler, der behoben werden soll. Ihr seid diejenigen, die dafür kämpfen und eben den Staat Israel kritisieren, zu Recht. Und deshalb sollten wir an unserer Arbeit festhalten, denn nur mit unseren Bemühungen können wir etwas verändern. Aber wenn wir verstummen und nichts mehr kritisieren, wäre das noch schlimmer. Die USA und die Europäische Union, aber auch Deutschland, haben ihre besondere Rolle für die Regelung des Konfliktes. Aber mittlerweile ist es ja so, dass jeder für sich beschäftigt ist und keiner sich darum kümmert. Anders ist es in der Ukraine. Da setzt man sich politisch auch ein, da kritisiert man, da setzt man Repressalien, Druck ein, aber nicht gegen Israel. Und das ist eben eine Sache, die wir weiterverfolgen und nicht nur zur Kenntnis nehmen wollen. Eine internationale Einmischung und Anstrengung ist sehr erforderlich, ist aber ein Wunsch. Und unsere Arbeit, also eure Arbeit, ist von da aus sehr, sehr wichtig. Und er hofft, dass wir dadurch viel Erfolg haben können.
Es war viel besser, als Isab es gehalten. Es war viel besser.
Nein, nein.
This immunity started many years ago, and I must say that it's a combination of interests and emotions. There is a sense of guilt feeling of the entire world toward Israel, which Israel knew always to manipulate for many years. And for sure, there is a guilt feeling in Germany. I see it not only not only in Germany, I see it everywhere. I travel a lot to Sweden. In Sweden, there is a lot of guilt feelings toward Israel as well, toward the Jewish people. And the guilt feelings is very justified. It just shouldn't be connected to political questions. And now it became even stronger, but Israel knew to manipulate it through all the years. And in many ways, this is corrupting Israel. Because you ask, what consequences does it have on us Israelis? We have the feeling that we can do whatever we want. It was the late Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, who once said it clearly. She said, after the Holocaust, the Jews have the right to do whatever they want. And that's the sense of the feeling in Israel. You don't tell us what to do because you did the Holocaust. You don't tell us what to do because we are the biggest victims in history. And this is very corrupting. So first of all, it is too early to judge because it is a process we just started. I totally agree to your analysis, but China is doing its first steps now. There was a remarkable achievement of China in going between Iran and Saudi Arabia and bringing them to renew their relations. But it's just a first step. But we have to remember that for China, it's only interests on the table. And I don't see much of an interest to take care of the Palestinian people, to take care of justice, to take care. China doesn't even have this rhetorics. The West at least had some kind of verbal commitment toward values like international law, morality, freedom. China doesn't have it at all. So I can't see how China will be better than the United States and Europe in solving the problem. I can't see it, but maybe there will be a surprise. And anyone who wants a Jewish state cannot get a democratic state. Because if it is Jewish, it cannot be democratic. Because there are two people here. And those people, if they have to choose between Jewish or democratic, they will choose Jewish. And that's the whole explanation. They try to cheat themselves that it can be Jewish and democratic. But it doesn't work because there are two peoples here. And people have to choose either democratic or Jewish. And the real choice is Jewish by the end of the day.
Okay.
Vielen Dank. Thank you to you.
Lieber Gideon, jetzt auf Deutsch. Vielen, vielen Dank für deine Ausführungen und ich hoffe, dass wir uns bald sehen, entweder bei dir in Tel Aviv oder hier in Deutschland. Vielen, vielen Dank, alles Gute und bis zum nächsten Mal.
Right.
Tschüss.
Danke für Sie, für euch alle.